We've been talking about starting points, and sometimes, we don't know if we have enough to start. We don't know if we're ready to start. We don't know, but when God places a dream, when he places a direction, when he places a passion in us, it's not really our call whether we start or not. If God speaks it to us, then God will prepare us and God will establish that running room, that path. But sometimes there's detours and there's delays, and that's what we're talking about is detours and delays, and that's just part of the start sometimes. And so that's part of the journey sometimes, we could say. We've been talking about this, kind of recap the last few weeks. We understand that God doesn't work in what was being done yesterday, and God doesn't work in what's being done tomorrow. God works in what's being done right now. Okay, you got to get that thought in your mind. God's working in what you're doing now. You may not be doing what you're doing now later, but right now that's what you're doing, and that's where God will work. That's where God will bless in what we're doing now. So we can't just be so future-minded that we throw off what God's doing now. We've got to start now because that's where God works now. Amen? Also, when God places a dream in our heart, we understand that takes us beyond our understanding. And when I say, or you say, but God, I just don't understand, that doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Because if God speaks something to you, if God directs you to something, it's going to take you beyond your comfort zone. It's going to take you beyond your understanding, and that's where the opportunity for faith to arise in us and trust in our Heavenly Father. And though we don't understand, doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense. God fully understands, and God is directing. And this is this idea, this context of starting point. So we're continuing that. Been looking at the life of Joseph. We've been looking at how God used him, how God developed him. I want to take you back to that scripture, Genesis 37:5. It says Joseph had a dream, and when that happened, and actually God spoke to him twice in this dream, and it began to give him a foreshadowing, began to give him an idea of what the future would behold and what God was going to do. But as you see his life play out in detail in this story, it's like maybe that wasn't the Lord. Maybe that wasn't the what God meant. Maybe that was just me. And we do this with things that God speaks to our hearts. But nonetheless, we know from Joseph's story, God had given him a dream. But when you look at those details, those steps in his life, how could God ever come about and make this a reality? And I think some of you are there. I think all of us hit that point that sometimes God, he speaks to us and we're like, Lord, I don't even know how this is going to play. I don't even know. I don't even know I'm just not going to do anything. I'm just going to. Well, then there's this whole other aspect that sometimes we know what God has said and we hit a detour and we hit a delay. I don't really know anybody that plans their vacation and they get going down the road, or you get going along and then all of a sudden you see that sign that says detour and you go, oh, awesome. I love this. I was hoping that on this vacation we would have detours and delays. I was hoping. You get to the airport and you look up and you're seeing if your flight and it says delayed. You're like, yes, more time in the airport. I love the airport. Nobody does that. All of our minds are kind of wired that when we hit that detour or we hit that delay that this is something wrong. But I'll give you a thought here. What if in what God has spoken to you and what God has directed you to and what this dream that he's giving you, that detour and delay is actually your deliverance? Because if you were to keep going, it would be destruction. If you were to keep going, it would be certain death. But this detour is going to take you a different direction. Let me give you some definitions here of detour and delay. See, sometimes it's this stop. It's this detour is a bypass or redirection. Delay is a holdup or postponement. They're different. A detour takes me around. It causes me to reroute. A delay just kind of, stop. You need to stop. You need to take notice. Detour and delays are part of the start, are part of the starting point, are part of the journey. Detours and delays, we have to understand they're there, and they're opportunities for us to build our faith. Write this down. Detours and delays occur because something isn't ready. Something isn't ready. If you're here and you feel like God has spoke something to your heart, but it just hasn't come about, or it looks like it's not going to come about, or there's maybe even a confusion. The enemy loves to play into that mindset in our lives. know that something is not ready. God's preparing something. You know, it very well could be that God's taking you from here to there, but there's no bridge yet. And God's building this bridge. And you're saying, I'm just mad. I just want to keep going. No, you really don't. Because you will fall. You will fail. You will not get, and so something's not ready. So, or this bridge is out. This thing's been blasted. He's going to reroute you, but it's going to take a little more time. It's going to be a reroute. Or it's just a delay. Maybe there's a bridge there, but it's up. Right now, something's going on, and the bridge is up, but the bridge will go back down, and there'll be a time. And so all of this plays into it. So if you're experiencing a delay, or a detour or delay, maybe that something isn't ready. You know, Joseph, he was young. Joseph, he was young. He wasn't ready for the dream that God had given him. This dream was huge. Joseph being the youngest, at this point, he's got 10 brothers, and his father, Jacob, name changed to Israel. Ultimately, the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, come out of this family here. Joseph's not ready because the dream was declaring that all his brothers, ultimately all the tribes of Israel, are going to bow down to him. His father and mother are going to bow down to him, and he's going to rule over them. I mean, this dream was not just hard for them to understand, they didn't receive it. Those that loved him, those that didn't love him, they didn't receive the dream. Joseph was young. It wasn't ready, yet the dream was still from God. There's some things that God will give you. It's not ready yet, but he may give you some insight. He may give you some direction, but it's not fully ready yet. So there's a detour and a delay in play. Look at Joseph's life. His brothers had sold him into slavery. His brothers at this point, they have sold him into slavery. They were going to kill him. Now they've sold him into slavery. That's where we pick back up on the story, Genesis 39:1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. You know, a bad situation turned into a worse situation, which appears to turn even into a more horrible situation than ever. I mean, where's the hope in this? If you're Joseph, what are you thinking? If you're Joseph, I've been betrayed. I've been cast off. My future will never be what I believed it was going to be. My future will never occur like what the dream said. It's been crushed. It's been gone. I mean, some of you have experienced that in some way, shape, or form. Like it'll never happen. This happened, therefore it'll never happen. And we don't allow God to be God because God's the one that can prepare things and change things and reroute things and causes detours and delays to get it ready. Sometimes we have these plans in our own mind and it seems good, but in reality, it's not. It reminds me of a little bird. You want to hear a story about a little bird? A little South Dakota bird. Little South Dakota bird, wintertime was coming. He's like, man, I don't want to fly south for the winter. You know, that's just such a waste of time. I think I can handle it here, and I'll just take care of things here, and I'll just really, just kind of, I can do this. And so it starts getting cold, and it starts getting windy, and it starts getting icy and wet, and it's a South Dakota winter, and this bird's like, okay, this is for the birds. I'm going south. And so he begins to fly south, and he is just flying, and he's giving it his best. But the winds and the ice, and it starts to form on his wings, and he's like, this isn't going to work. I can't fly anymore. And he begins to crash, and literally crashes into a barnyard, crashes right into a barnyard. And he's like, this is where it's going to end. This is where I'm going to die, right here in the middle of a barnyard. And he looks up, and he's freezing. He's literally freezing to death. And here comes this cow that walks by, doesn't see him, just kind of walks over the top of him, stops, and plops right down on him. I mean, plops. Like, dumps. Like, not good. And the bird's like, here I was going to die. I'm going to freeze to death, and now I've been dumped on. This is not good. He's just sitting there, and he's just, I can't believe it. I don't know what. But all of a sudden, something starts to happen. He begins to get warm. He starts warming up. He's like, you know what? Okay, this is bad. This is a bad situation. But hey, I think, okay, I got dumped on, but hey, I'm warming up. I think I'm going to live. I think I'm going to sing. And so he just begins to sing and chirp and like it's July. And I mean, he's dumped on and he's chirping and singing. Well, there's a barnyard cat. And the cat's over in the barn, and he hears chirping and singing going on out here, and he's like, what in the world? And he hears this ruckus happening, and he's singing, just going off, and so the cat goes out there and sees the bird and picks the bird up, kind of wipes him off, and eats him. That's the end of the story. That's it. Yeah, just the end of the story. The cat ate the bird. You guys don't like that story. You want to hear the moral of the story? Okay, I'll just go on. So Joseph, you want to hear the moral of the story? Yeah. Okay, I was just seeing if you're awake. All right. So the moral of the story is those who dump on us are not always our enemy. Those who pick us up and clean us off aren't always our friend. And if you're in a situation where you find yourself dumped on, it's usually better to just keep your mouth shut. All right. Sometimes the starting point in the journey, I mean, we get these ideas, these plans, and we need a detour. We need a delay. We need, this isn't working. I think God uses detours and delays. It gets things ready, and we learn at that time, in that detour and that delay. Joseph needed a detour. He needed a delay because what God had in store, it wasn't ready. Look at Genesis 39, 2-4. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Here he is. He's been sold into slavery, and he's been bought, and now he's still in slavery, but look who's with him. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, interesting, so there's something going on that even the master can see that the Lord is with Joseph and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. What his brothers had tried to steal from him, that favor that was upon him, his father had made him a coat, and it represented favor. That first thing that they did was they stripped him of his coat when they threw him into the pit, and they sold him into slavery. The enemy wants to strip us of our favor. But even in this bad situation, even in what seemed like not just a detour or a delay, what seemed like a denial of this dream, you're denied. This dream is dead. In the midst of all this, here was the Lord with him. And it was obvious even to those who maybe didn't understand everything, but God was giving him favor and God was blessing him in the midst of this. And all of a sudden, he hasn't lost his favor. He still has his favor, but the enemy would love for him to think, the enemy would love for you to think that your favor is gone over the situation, over the detour, the delay, or even in your mindset, it's complete denial, it's complete death to the dream. It wasn't the case with Joseph. But I found this out, that how we go through things, when we hit a detour or delay, how we go through things determines really the condition of how we come through things. When I go through it with an attitude that I'm griping, that I'm questioning, that my faith is gone, that I'm beginning to accuse, that I'm beginning to declare that this thing is done, that this dream is not going to happen. When I begin to do that, well, that determines how I go, how I come through this, how I come through this time, this preparation time. And we've got to be aware that God's working. Even when we don't understand, God's still working. Paul describes this. You know, sometimes we lay it all into the physical and the logical, but Paul begins to bring out the aspect of the spiritual. 1 Corinthians 2, 12-14, he says, what we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. Sometimes God freely gives us a detour because we need it. Sometimes God freely gives us a delay because we need it. Something, remember, isn't ready. Something's not ready yet. He says, verse 13, this is what we speak, not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. Some of the things you're going to go through, some of the detour and delay that you're experiencing even now could be very spiritual. Most of the time it is very spiritual. We have to trust God at that level because we're never going to make sense out of it in the physical or the logical. It supersedes that. So remember, detours, delays, they're in place because something is not ready. Write this down. Detours and delays bring an awareness to where we are. They bring an awareness to where we are. Let me explain this. Up until we hit a detour or a delay, when God's placed a dream, when God's placed a direction, when God's placed in our minds a path, when we experience that detour or delay, it doesn't cause us to focus on our destination. It causes us to focus where we are. Because here's how it plays out. You're going along, and all of a sudden you see the sign, detour, or bridge out, or whatever, but you realize you're going to be rerouted, or you're going to have to stop. It doesn't cause me to think where I'm going. It causes me to think, okay, where am I at? How are we going to do this? You remember the atlas? Now we take our phone and we look at it. And I was having this conversation the other day, and I go, it's kind of hard to remember how I got around without this, you know. But I do remember sometimes pulling over to the side of the road and pulling out the atlas. State Farm, that was our insurance company. They had the atlas they would give you, and I would pull out that atlas, and it would get me where I needed to go. But what happens is when you're on a detour, when you're delayed, you don't sit there and pull out the atlas. You don't pull out the map. You don't pull out the phone and ask whoever, Siri or the other phone, and you don't ask, oh yeah, tell me about my destination again. Oh yeah, can you mark on a map where I'm going? No, you focus on where you're at. Because I can only move from where I'm at. It's kind of like declaring I'm a child of God. Yesterday? No. Tomorrow? No. Today. So you got to focus where you're at today, because that's where God's going to work from in this detour and this delay. That's where your faith is going to be built. You focus on where you're at. Look at Genesis 39, 6 through 9. It tells us where Joseph's at. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. And with Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns is entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife." And listen to this. "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against his master? No, God." See, this is where Joseph's at. This is the difference. Joseph has been detoured. Joseph has been delayed. The dream was given. We know it's from God. He's hit detour and delay, and seemingly this looks impossible for this dream to come about. But God's working. God's working, and in this, it's obvious that Joseph has taken hold of something that God is working, because it's not just evident to Joseph, it's evident to his master, and now he's declaring this even in the midst of temptation. How could I possibly do this? To God. To God, the one who's holding it all together, the one who's literally redirecting, the one who's literally holding things up, who's holding things together. How could I sin against God? See, Joseph realized that his favor and his position, where he was at, was from God. You got to realize that. See, so many times we want to say, "God, why would you let me be here? Why would you see that?" When in reality, it's just a detour. God's going to redirect, or it's a delay. God's holding it. Something's not ready, but at the same time, God wants you to focus where you're at, and he's going to work right here, and you've got to trust him in that moment, in that time, and honor him in that, just like Joseph. The detours and delays God uses in our lives causes us to evaluate where we're at. You know, I could stop right there and I go, where are you at? Where are you at with God right now? Where are you at the trust level with him in this journey? See, this encompasses how we get there, the journey we're on and where we're headed. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. Joseph sensed that the Lord was with him in this time. I told you a few weeks ago that people are watching when we declare a God dream. that people keep it in mind. He told his brothers, they didn't forget. We saw that played out in the story. He told his father, it says, he didn't, he's like, are you seriously thinking that we're going to bow down? But his dad filed this away, like, okay, keep that in mind. My son had a dream. Detours and delays, write this down, present the opportunity to reposition us for what's to come. It presents the opportunity to reposition us for what's to come. Some of you may be here today and you need some repositioning. God's getting something ready. God spoke something, through circumstances, situations, detours, delays. You need a repositioning. Joseph needed a repositioning. Think about it. Had he been left in his house, he not only had brothers who hated him, who were jealous of him, but to the point, they didn't just want to sell him, they actually wanted to kill him. So we say, it was horrible that he was sold into slavery. It was horrible that he went down this path. But in reality, there may have been no path. There may have been no bridge, no opportunity, because it would have been stifled had God not detoured or delayed him. What we think logically, what Joseph could have easily thought is logical as I've been denied, that this was just, it's been killed. My brothers killed the dream. No, in reality, God was delivering him with the detour and delay. In reality, God may be delivering you with the detour and delay that you're experiencing right now. Don't point a finger at him. Don't cast off what you're going through, that God couldn't use it, that God couldn't build you, that God couldn't reposition you for the opportunity he has for the dream. Look at it, Genesis 39:10-12. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me," but he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. I think it's interesting. What was the first thing the brother stripped from him? His cloak. That represented his favor. This cloak, he ends up, she strips him of this cloak. This cloak, as we'll see here in a moment, could be a representative of favor. Again, the fight is over the favor. If God could, God, as a child of God, we've declared it, we'll declare it in a moment. As a child of God, I have favor. It's something to say, who are you? Oh, I'm a child of God. I mean, that carries with it favor. Joseph is a child of God. He had a representative of favor. His brothers tried to strip him of it. That's like a representative of what the enemy tries to do with. In the same sense, here's Joseph. I am not going to dishonor God. And it's as though his favor is being stripped away. Again, Genesis 39:16-21. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. You could add favor in there. As soon as I screamed, he lost his favor. Again, it's a fight over the favor. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger, obviously. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, get this, who was with him? The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Wow, Lord, how could you possibly use this? I want to close with this. How could you possibly use the situation I'm in? How could you possibly, this detour just seems too drastic. This delay just seems too long. Lord, it just looks like you led me up to this point, and now I'm not going to be able to keep going. I knew I couldn't start. You know what? I can't restart this journey. I started this journey. You know what? We might as well turn back. That's how we process sometimes. But that's not how faith works, church. What God's placed in your heart, He'll equip you. What God's placed in your heart, He'll empower you. What God's placed in your heart, He will direct you. And sometimes that's a repositioning. Sometimes that's just a hold up. Just wait. I've got something cooking. I've got something going. Just wait. You say, "No, God, I don't want to wait." Yes, if God says wait, you want to wait. If God says go, you want to go. But if God says wait, you want to wait. You're a child of God. And see, God will use detours and will use delays to get you where you need to go, just like He did with Joseph. His story, we'll get into it in the next few weeks. We have the luxury to read the story in its entirety. Here's what's amazing is God doesn't have the luxury. He's king. He knows your story in its entirety. He knew your story, as Psalms 139 tells us, before one day ever came to be. And he knows where you need detours, and he knows where you need delays, and he knows when you need repositioned, and he knows what he has for you. We say it, Jeremiah 29:11, I know what I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. That applies to this. You may be sitting there going, I started, this starting point, I started and it just seems like it's stopped. It seems like I've got this detour, or I've got this delay. I just feel like it could be that God's cooking up your deliverance, as he was with Joseph. I'm just putting it all together. Yeah, there's going to be some rough bumps in the road, but notice he never left Joseph. The Bible's very clear. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Each time the Lord was with him. Know this, you keep your eyes on the Lord. You keep your eyes on the Lord. The awareness that he's with you. That changes you. It may not change the situation, but it changes you, amen.